Hi there, I've reached the winter season of 1944 turn in this game of the Second World War, Pacific Theatre, and the Soviets come in summer of this year, and you can see the Americans will get A-bombs next year. We've definitely reached a turning point in the war, apart from the fact that the other theatre attrition is becoming quite high. They've got a few, there's some cushion there that the Allies have prepared. Lots of eliminated units are building up. There's lots being built on the production track, but although, for example, the Japanese now have whopping 16 resources against the US 11 combined with the British 3, they just don't have enough available resources. So the US regenerates 5 as an impulse, and the Japanese were regenerating 6. They'll now regenerate 7. But they're spending sort of that building new units. They just haven't got enough to build more. We do have all these reinforcements coming in, so the US get 4 more CV units and these long-range SF bombers, so high altitude. Japanese will just get a measly 1 more CV unit. These, I'm not sure. The Japanese have taken over. I think they're just completely removed, but yeah, I'm sure they are. I don't know why I put that down. So the situation on the map, you can see that the war really has turned. So in the last year, the last few seasons, the Americans threw the Japanese out of New Britain, and the Solomons, they took Rabaul there, and they were trying for Truk, but an effective defence from air units sunk the marine carrying transports. So they'll try again this year. But the Americans in that conflict completely took out the air force in Truk itself. So there's still sort of integral Japanese in there. It will have to be taken out. You can see the Americans, they've now based an air unit in Guam there. That was never actually taken by the Japanese. That was a bit of an oversight by me. That should really have required an amphibious assault. But there you have it. And it's finally getting to the point. Essentially, we're reaching the point where the Americans are converging on Japan. At the same time, that's kind of oddly enough in history comparison, the Japanese just took the Netherlands East Indies as Rabaul and so forth were falling. So Japanese are still gaining on this side and losing on this side. So that's when they just took that massive leap to the resources, 3 resource points for that. But at the same time, the British, essentially, there was a massive conflict for back and forth for a long time. The British, basically, that was all they were doing, was supporting the Dutch there. And the tide turned when the Japanese concentrated all their air against the British and Dutch air. So essentially the British kind of retreated from that and started moving up from the Malaysian peninsula and took Thailand back, and now they're moving on Burma. And the Commonwealth have brought infantry unit here and some fleet so that they can start moving around here. So they'll be able to push the Japanese back this way. I think it's quite interesting. We're at a really interesting point. This year is basically going to be about the Americans moving up their air umbrella. The question is really that they need Iwo Jima there and these islands to start strategic bombing. And best is Iwo Jima because they get the strategic bombers from this range. They will not get escort fighters, so they could be shot down by the Japanese. From here they can have escort fighters and drop an atomic bomb. If they drop an atomic bomb, the Japanese have to make a morale roll. If they drop 2 on them, they make another morale roll at +4. Essentially, they will surrender. So the question then, the point is that the Americans essentially have to move their air umbrella as close as they can to Japan so that they can perform that act. Or they could try a land invasion of Japan. That is also possible. But the air umbrella is really what you need to cover everything else. And to get the air umbrella forward, you need, to bring in the infantry, and to bring in the infantry, you need the Marines, you need the Navy. So it's still that very interesting movement. And then the Japanese are going to have to shrink back and try and retain enough air and land forces. In Japan, they only need their Navy really long enough for their retreat. And so retain enough to be able to push back that American air umbrella. So that is the question. And it might be interesting that I think this year that Americans will be about the Americans moving up to here, and then the Japanese will have to respond to that. If that means they have to bring enough forces out of there, then the Americans and the Commonwealth can move in and start taking back these. But at the moment, the Japanese are very strong here, and the Americans can't really do that and that at the same time. And the Commonwealth are concentrated up there. So what it might mean is the Japanese are left with the sort of supplies here, although the Americans, I think, could begin to cut it. If they put some of their air units around here, they can cut the supply line, and so that and submarine units, so that the Japanese don't have all those resources. It's very interesting. Although the Japanese have a lot of resources, they just don't have enough units coming in as reinforcements. Because units coming in reinforcements, you spend one resource and then you can bring them straight onto the board with another action point. But when units are eliminated, they have to be rebuilt, and that takes so much time. It's not a quick enough cycle at the pace that the war is at for the Japanese to cycle in their losses quick enough. So they're having that slow dwindling supply of actual units, or that of war capable units, even though they have a lot of resources. So there we are. That's where we are at the moment. It's I just played a whole year, and it took about 45 minutes. So that's great. Although I have noticed a couple of mistakes. One was that I should have added, when the Dutch joined the Allies, I should have added their resources to the Commonwealth, and I didn't know that. The rule book is, I think the rule book's essentially fine, but what it's sort of, most things, everything's sort of covered. There's a few clarifications and missing things that could be there, but they're generally nearly always are with war games. But what it needs is it needs something to summarize everything. So you've got things about what happens in surrender and resources scattered. Not just there's the rule sections, and then it's scattered at various different how it applies in different cases at the back of the book with all the country specific cases. And so it's very difficult to collate that all and bring it all together in mind. If you don't want to make the rule book bigger, then it could have a supplement, like I say, a 4-page, you could call it a player aid if you like, but it just summarises all those things. So summarises how resources are impacted by different nations and so forth, and what not to forget when doing it, instead of you having to remember 4 or 5 different sections of the rule book. Same thing, like I've made this naval combat detection matrix, and that has just assisted me now. And before that I was kind of shying off naval combat because I just had to keep flipping around saying, okay, so if the defender's detected and the attacker's detected, but one has a CV unit and the other doesn't, what does that mean? What are they possible of? Because you can have surprise, you can have regular combat, you can have carrier supremacy, and you can have exchange. So there's 4 different things that come in depending on those different factors, and it's in the rule book, but it's not all laid out in one point. It's in 4 different sections, and so bringing it all together is what this game needs. So it's a fantastic game. It plays really well. but it needs work to either you have a fantastic sort of mind that can hold all that thing together, and you have to study the rule book to get it, or just to form your own play aids to put your brain out there like that. So there we go, just a quick update, and I think I'll record one video just at the end, sort of on my what happened in the war here in the Pacific, and any final thoughts I have on the game itself as a game. So over and out.